Thank you, and hello, everyone. I know the rains put a little bit of a dampener on the evening, but delighted that many of you are here and here on time to welcome back to the city our homegrown Nirupama, right, and Rajesh as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today we are here to talk to Nirupama and Rajesh, the brains behind this book, The Nurturing Quotient. They've both spent years observing leaders in their own corporate roles, as well as coaches and mentors to many others. And what they've discovered is fairly simple. Beyond being exceptionally results-driven, there is a much more human side to leadership. Now, before you file that away as your soft skills that I will deal with after I make next quarter's results, the reality is, and hopefully we'll hear from them over the course of the evening, much of sustained leadership that they have seen over time in large organizations are those who nurture not just themselves, as well as the people around them. So much so that they've also developed a little tool called Nurturing Quotient. We've heard of the IQ, the EQ, RQ even, relationship quotient. But now we have something new called the Nurturing Quotient. And we'll talk a little bit about how to measure your own ability to nurture yourself and others. So without further ado, let me begin the conversation for this evening, Nirupama and Rajesh. You're not just collaborators on this book, you're also collaborators in life, right? So what inspired you to write this book? Nirupama on this topic, and Rajesh with your life path.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you to MMA for having us here. Absolutely a pleasure to come back. This is our hometown, so Chennai has always had a special place, though we've been living in Gurgaon for a long time. And thank you for hosting us, and delighted to be here and share our thoughts on our book. So, Satya, I've been a leadership coach and a facilitator and an author. So, of course, my last book was powerful. We finished that, and then we've been having discussions on leadership because that's also dinner table conversation for us. And during my interactions with the people I coached and the leaders I worked with, I noticed 2-3 things, especially in the post-COVID world. A lot of leaders I would coach would talk about what I call the 3 S's, stress. Huge amounts of stress. The coaching goals were often around work-life balance. How do I manage my anger? I'm not getting time for anything. So stress continued to be a huge theme. And I said, people are spending 14 hours at work. Why is there so much stress? Second was a struggle. In terms of all the challenges that they were facing on a day-to-day basis. Things were changing so quickly. The old models were not working. The Gen Zs, the millennials were demanding a completely different kind of a leadership. And these were a lot of issues that came up in the workshops. And the third S, I would say, is a strong sense of dissonance between what they wanted to do, which is really, I want to be there for my people, I want to nurture them, but the numbers, the pressure. How do I manage these two polarities? And the old models didn't have a clear answer. So the thinking, and that's how, Rajesh and I were discussing that, what can be done? How can we make it better so that some of these things get solved? And, I was also wondering what next to write. So I think that's how the Nurturing Quotient also came about.
And why with each other?
Well, that answer is fairly straightforward. She's written 3 books, so I said, let me back a winning horse. So that was as far as that's concerned. But as far as the book is concerned, for any leader, I think there are 2 parts, right? One is the what do you want to do, which is all about mission, vision, strategy, and so on and so forth, which even if you can't do, you can very easily outsource to a McKinsey or a BCG and do it. But I think the other big part is the how, right? And that differentiates between a good leader and a great leader in terms of how they go about doing stuff, how they take a team together and deliver, results. And I think there we saw that the old models, like she mentioned, of command and control no longer helped. We needed to have a much more collaborative style of leadership. And I think COVID made it even more clear, right? So during COVID times, and we all went through that, the first 20 minutes in any conversation was spent on how are you feeling, how's your family doing, are you taking good care of yourself, before you even started talking about business, if at all, right? So I think that sort of, led us to say, should we not look at that? And the second is having been blessed to do nurturing for ourselves and others as a normal course of events. So I have several passions in my life. Photography is one of them. Yoga is another one. All of these have nurtured me in different ways. So that's something that sort of came very naturally as well. So I think it was a combination of some external factors, some internal, which ultimately led to this.
Very nice. And I think the word nurturing is actually quite special here, right? And I read in the book, you allude to how leadership is no longer about a general rallying the troops. No offense, Captain. But it is much more about actually being a gardener, right? And that struck me because you don't think about a leader and equate them to a gardener. So talk to me a little bit, Nirupama, about why a leader should think about themselves as a gardener and what qualities from a gardener's perspective should they embody?
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I'm not much of a gardener. I barely have few plants, but I really believe that gardeners perform a valuable service of nurturing. In fact, the word nurture itself is used usually for children and plants. And that seemed to hold the secret for a new kind of leadership that we wanted. In fact, we've looked at the process of gardening and found it's very similar to the process of leadership. And first, you have to prepare the soil, which is create the right environment, right vision, the values, and make sure the soil is prepared. A leader has to do that. The second is plant the seeds, which is get the right people, get the right resources, get the new ideas. So plant that. That's not enough. The next is provide water and sunshine, which is what you do as you coach, as you nurture, as you mentor, as you give directions, all of that. And the fourth is also important, which is pulling out the weeds. What doesn't work. A good gardener knows when to prune as well. Prune people of their bad habits, undesirable behaviors, as well as remove the elements that are not working so that you have this beautiful garden. And that takes, that takes a special kind of skill and qualities, which is why we speak about the 4 qualities of hope that leaders need, a gardener also needs.
So hope as in you hope and aspire for a future, or is there more to hope?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually in hope, what we say is what are the 4 qualities required for somebody to be a good nurturing leader? And those are humility, openness, patience, and empathy. So humility is the ability to say that, look, I don't know, or I have made a mistake, right? And just have that ability. And we find that there is a direct correlation between being humble and being successful, right? So humility is one key thing. The second is openness, right? And the curiosity to go beyond just our workspace. What we found was leaders who were willing to ask questions, to explore, were again able to be successful both at business and at nurturing others as well. The third, which is quite an undervalued virtue or a value, is patience, right? Because today, everybody is looking for quick wins. They're looking for quarter-to-quarter results. So in that context, patience becomes important. Of course, it cannot be forever. But are we willing to invest and look at certain things as investment as opposed to cost? So the patience then becomes very important. And the third one is empathy. Again, often used word. But empathy, one of the very interesting definitions which I liked is, are you able to put yourself in the other person's shoes without wearing them? So it's not about carrying the burden of the world, but yes, you are empathetic, but you also let people figure out what they need to do, right? So I think these are the 4 qualities that we saw which sort of resonated with us, and we call them the fundamental qualities required for nurturing.
Very interesting. So when we come back to, therefore, the book, I think it wasn't about 20, 30, or even 50 CXOs, right? I think it's amazing that what you've done, over 115 CXOs that you've actually... CEOs.
Yeah, and thank you, Satya, for being one of them as well. Yes.
You're welcome. But insights from so many different industries, and perspectives, and I suspect also tenures, right?
Yes.
And different kinds of companies and so forth. So it's a fairly rich compilation of insights. Rajesh, from all of this that you heard, right, from within the book, how much of this nurturing do you believe is an innate trait versus how much is it possible to actually learn this? and get better at it?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, right? So there are, what we found was there are factors which affect nurturing, the extent of nurturing. Values is one of them, individual values. How we grow up, the culture, what's there at home, how's the culture at work, and upbringing makes a big difference in terms of how you nurture. Demographics has an impact. Personality has an impact. So there are several factors which play a role in the extent to which you nurture self and others. But there is a level of innateness to it as well, right? And what we found is that, if you are a person who's humble and, open and patient and empathetic, the chances of you being a better nurturer are higher, right? So there is an element of both to it. But we also believe, like any other skill, this can be nurtured as well, right? So in the book, in the end, we have a model which is called AISH, AISH, which is awareness, intention, start action, and habit creation. So suppose you want to develop patience, first thing is to be aware that I need to develop that. The second is to set an intention around it. Third is to start certain set of actions, do it consistently so that over a period of time it becomes a habit, right? So I think a mix of both, I would say.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that, the nurture versus nature question, which people keep asking. And the other interesting thing is people assume women are innately nurturing. And I've actually attended a discussion. We said, do women have a better nurturing style? And we found that is not necessarily the case. Out of all the people we interviewed, we found there was a good mix and a balance. And, if it's a skill, like Rajesh said, it's not restricted to just one gender or any particular age, right? So though that does have an impact at some point of time, but it is gender agnostic, it's age agnostic. Anybody with the mindset who wants to care for people and be there can do it and acquire behaviors and skills to do that.
And just as a statistic, out of the 117, there were 32 women leaders we interviewed. So we did have a significant number of women leaders as well. And like Nirupama was saying, fairly gender agnostic in terms of your mindset versus whether you're a man or a woman.
So the nurturing, as they articulate in the book, has two components. One is nurturing oneself, and the other is nurturing others, right? Maybe we could do a little bit of an audience interaction here, and each of you can just simply raise your hand. How many of you are much more intentional about nurturing others versus yourself? Okay? I'm seeing roughly about a quarter of the room. Yeah? How many of you are the other way around? Much more intentional about nurturing self versus others? Even fewer. Even fewer. And I'm going to say the rest of you are not thinking about nurturing just yet. And hopefully at the end of this,
yes, after
you go buy the book and you learn how you can, regardless, right, of where you are today.
Yes.
How does this split reflect in some of the interviews and insights that you've actually gathered?
Yeah, which was interesting, Satya. So we found, no one specific glaring insight, but a couple of interesting things. A lot of leaders we spoke to were very intentional about nurturing their physical self. They were taking care of their health, probably post-COVID, also, the reality had an impact. They were very particular about leisure time and getting a little downtime as well. So we found that was intentional. Not so much perhaps about the mental and the spiritual aspect. That was, yes, I have to learn for my job, so I'm learning, but I'm not nurturing myself mentally as much. And even at the spiritual level, and which is nothing to do with religion, we talk about spiritual as connecting to purpose, sense of contribution, time for reflection, having a faith-based practice, whatever that is. There were people who were less intentional about that. And when it comes to nurturing others, again, there was a split. And many leaders felt it happened on the go. It also depended on the organization culture, the industry, the kind of pressures that were there. But we found nurturing others the intention was there, but people were not as intentional as taking time out. Mostly it happened on the go for a lot of them, which is what we saw.
And Rajesh, talk to me a little bit about anything that surprised you when you interviewed so many people, anything that you didn't expect.
Yeah, one thing was that, like we said, we interviewed 117 CEOs. So, one thing is always that do CEOs have the time to, nurture themselves and nurture others? Surprisingly, we did find that a lot of them did take out time to nurture themselves. So that was good. And how did they do it? One of the ways that we again saw was they figured out a way to weave it into their routine, right? So there was a leader who said, I have commute in the morning and in the evening. So what I do is before lunch, I just walk in the office premises downstairs so that I can still get my walk. Another leader said, I take my calls in the evening while I'm walking. So one of the things is people do find a way to sort of weave it into their own routine. So that was interesting. And the other one was, yes, they were, like Nirupama mentioned, intentional about it when it came to nurturing self. But what was surprising to see is they were very methodical on nurturing self, penciling their meetings in their calendar, etc. But nurturing others happened a little bit like, oh, by the way. They had the intention to do it, but it was not like, oh, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to put 1 hour aside to mentor and coach. Or this is how I'm going to inspire people. So that intentionality was not there.
Yeah, and that part was a lot linked to their own personality. In fact, we look at, what are the things that differentiate how, not the if, maybe even the why and how. A lot of it is to do with their own values and personality. Some leaders were very naturally drawn towards nurturing others. For many others, they were not intentional. It happened on the go. They felt organization, policies, and culture would take care of that as well.
Very interesting. And, it's also counter at some level. You believe that the more senior you are, more tenured you are, you have less time for nurturing yourself and others. But it seems like that's not the case, and that's definitely not your finding. Yeah. These are individuals who find the time to make that a priority.
Exactly. Yeah, and there was a distinction also between being busy and being, how shall I say, mindfully occupied towards doing these things. And many of them found the time to be mindfully occupied in doing some of the things which was important to them.
In fact, one of the things we talk about in the mental well-being is how to minimize distractions. So, everything like when people say, how do you find time? It's more like you have to make time. And making time is about making choices, right?
Give me a few examples, right? Because I can see heads nodding around the room. Everyone has these distractions much more than ever before. So what are some of the examples that come top of mind to you to minimize them in a way that's actually practical for us?
Yeah, different people follow different things. I think if you look at it, while we say time is finite, I personally believe that more than time, energy is finite, right? So we have finite energy and we have to make a choice on where do we want to expend that energy, right? So I think that's a fundamental starting point. The second is when it came to how this time or energy is invested, different people had different ways of managing it. I'll talk about a few examples. Like somebody said, a couple of leaders said that, look, no matter what, if it is 9 p.m., I put away my phone. So before I go to sleep, 1 hour, I don't look at my phone at all. One from a radiation and all of that perspective, but also any distracting messages that come and reels that I look at. So I put away my phone, right? So that was one example of it. There were a few people who were into meditation. So half an hour of meditation in the morning was non-negotiable. And obviously then you're not looking at your phone, right? So those were a couple of ways in which they were doing it. I think for me, again, like both of us practice yoga. Now, in that 1 hour in the morning when you're practicing yoga, you minimize your distraction any which ways, right? By not. So I think this thing was mobile is one of the biggest forms of distraction. And people were finding other ways to sort of, not do that and focus on something else. Reading, again, was a lot of leaders spoke about it. They would like to do more of it, but they don't get time to do of it. So how can you set aside some time to do that? One interesting hack that many people were using was habit stacking, right? So you stack a habit that you want to create next to an existing habit so that over a period of time that also becomes a habit that you follow. So these were a few examples.
And an interesting thing we found was almost everybody had a morning routine, because that is the time which at least you have an hour for yourself where other people don't come and, make demands on you. So whether it was meditation or running or walking or just a quiet time for myself, the morning we found was a very important chunk of time, and all the leaders were very mindful about how they spent their early morning in order to prepare for what could be a very chaotic, unpredictable day. So we found that was very important as well.
Very interesting. Why don't we shift gears to talking a little bit about how to measure this, right? Because reality is, in today's day and world, we're all very comfortable with numbers. And I think we're conditioned to that, right? We know what it means to get 100 on 100 in math. And whatever we do, we're always striving towards, right? A number that gives us a sense for where we are. So that's what I actually love about the book itself, right? At the end, towards the end, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. There is a QR code and you can actually scan, answer a few questions. It took me less than 10 minutes, hardly, actually 7 to 8 minutes. And I got my Nurturing Quotient, right? NQ, my Nurturing Quotient. And I will admit it was a little bit of I was excited, right? And I was curious. And then I didn't get the 100 on 100. Right? And so I, dutifully though sent it along and I said, with a tear emoji. And I said, I only got a 7.6, right? Out of 10.
But that is good news because if you get 100 on 100, it's like,
nothing more to learn.
Nothing more to learn.
I guess. So that's the perspective Nirupama gave me. But
Yes.
What was interesting in this is I broke it down into a nurturing self quotient and a nurturing others quotient. And Nirupama, do you want to walk through the different dimensions perhaps and what this means and how
Yes.
one can read this?
Yes. Firstly, let me say this is a good score. You've done well. You've passed. you've more than passed. As you can see, your nurturing others is more than nurturing self, which is also interesting. Nothing right or wrong, and it's not. We don't see a direct correlation, but it's an interesting point. And in nurturing self, we look at 4 aspects, which is physical, mental, emotional, as well as spiritual. And we have specific practices and behaviors for each. So as you can see in yours, you're doing very well on the physical, you do very well on the emotional. Maybe the mental and spiritual are areas for growth. We don't even call it improvement. It's really areas for growth. So the mental well-being we talk about is mindfulness, minimizing distractions, finding time to learn a new skill, exposing yourself to new ideas, new learning. And for busy leaders, that can be a challenge because the others happen on the go, or, you might take downtime to cultivate a passion, or you feel that your mental well-being is taken care of because your job is so demanding itself.
It's already giving me enough of an intellectual.
Yeah, I have to learn every time. So this is really over and above that. It's also looking at the future. So if I were to look at it, I would say maybe this is a chance for you to reflect and see in the mental well-being, what is it that you can do well. And in terms of nurturing others, great scores across the board. But you might also want to look at the specifics. So we also give a set of best practices, if you can see at the end. And you might want to pick on one of them, which you feel you can do more. And this can also change, right? If you've been a stable CEO, you've done well, you've reached, but let's say you shift jobs. It can change. So this is not a personality assessment. This is looking at behaviors, which when your context changes, that can also change.
Perhaps life stage as well.
Life stage as well. That at the same time, one of the reasons we want to do this is don't wait to get a heart attack before you start taking care of your health. Don't wait to get laid off before you decide to enhance your mental well-being. And, don't wait to retire at 60 before you say, okay, now I will start nurturing others and giving back to society and, following a spiritual path. We believe it can happen at any age and stage. And this, for some people, can be a wake-up call and say, oh my God. For some people, it could be reassuring that, hey, this is what I would like to continue with. Or come back after 6 months and see how you've done if you've picked up on 1 or 2 practices. So the reason, we like to measure things is you can see growth as well. So when I looked at it, I found I was pretty good on mental because I like doing that. But the emotional, in terms of cultivating a strong passion and having deep connections, was an area of work. So that's something maybe I proactively start doing, reaching out, being intentional about meeting people and having those connections, and then measure it over a period of time. And I might say, hey, inspiring is something I want to do better. And we have techniques for what is it that you want to do under inspiring, which is benchmarked to what leaders do, and you can start working on that.
Thank you. Rajesh, on the nurturing others quotient, right, there were about 4 categories. The first is mentoring and coaching. The second is inspiring. The third is listening. and the fourth, empowering. If I forced you to rank order these, right? What is the ranks you would give across these four dimensions?
I think I'd pick listening first. Yeah, because listening is fundamental to the others as well. If you are able to listen well, then you are able to, mentor. Coaching, definitely you need listening. I think even to inspire people, you need to listen and know what their drivers are, what their motivators are. And to empower is also, so I think listening would probably, figure top of the charts for me. Second would be probably inspiring. Because I think ultimately, all of this we are not doing for charity. We have a business agenda as well, right? So you want all of this to happen so that people can be better versions of themselves so that they can deliver business results. So from that perspective, to me, inspiring would be the second one. And therefore empowering, that sort of goes with that. That would be the third. And mentoring and coaching is one way to do some of these. So to me that, if I have to really rank order, I would pick those.
Super. Wonderful. I guess as a follow-up, this is great for me as an individual. You also talked about how it's dynamic and I could work on this, come back, track my progress and so forth. But how would you suggest an organization use a tool like this?
Firstly, I would suggest that organizations do use a tool like this because, what gets measured gets done as well. So we are also building this out to something beyond the book, Satya. So the reason why we have a Nurturing Quotient is so that people can measure. We offer a leadership development journey for organizations so that we can embed this into an organization culture. So while we do have interventions at an organization level, I think very simply get everybody to take their Nurturing Quotient assessment and then build in certain behaviors and practices, one at an individual level, second even at an organizational level. In fact, a couple of leaders we spoke to have actually launched fitness drives. They had competitions where people had to complete 10,000 steps and they made it a part of the organization culture. Many organizations have a coaching culture which is built into it. Right? By the very nature, people have to get coaching or they have to reach out for mentoring. Many organizations have even something, one of my clients has a collaboration space as a way of empowering. So you go there and have your meetings and it's labeled. So I think one is at the behavioral level, the other is at the practices and policy level. Right? So what do you reward people for? Very often, we look at individual health, get a medical checkup. So doing an organization health checkup would also be really good as a part of this. So you have great places to work surveys, you have all of that. Look at the results, look at, how NQ can be a way for people to become happier. Look at your employee engagement scores. And I think if you're happy, satisfied, healthy at an individual level, you bring your best self to work. And many organizations might neglect this part of it. Right? Really looking at, hey, we don't care how you do the numbers, but focusing on the individual's mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being yields much greater results, builds employee loyalty. Actually, you have somebody who will go the extra mile for the organization. One of the leaders said a very interesting thing. Said people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I think that can be a great starting point for organizations to build this as a part of the culture itself.
Interesting. So Rajesh, would that mean that this is largely applicable to the C-suite or the N-1? Or do you see this applicable across all tenures or only some dimensions applying to sort of more junior tenures and others for more senior tenures?
I was literally going to answer that as an addition to what you were saying. And I actually think this is not just about leaders. It's for anybody, right? We have just used leaders and organizations and CEOs to provide a contextual framework. If you look at any homemaker, any student, anybody needs to nurture themselves and nurture. And when we say nurture others, it's not just about people who report to me or anything. It's the ecosystem, right? So even if you're an individual contributor, you are still working with an ecosystem of partners who are, say, external to the company. And you will find that the difference between somebody who's successful and not is how well are they able to work with that ecosystem. So firstly, I think it's applicable across outside of organization as well as within. Secondly, applicable across levels, irrespective of hierarchy. So those are two important things. And I think the third part which you were asking is, how organizations can take it forward. Ultimately, our intent is, if you are able to nurture yourself well and nurture others well, you are able to lead a happy and a holistic life. And that would have a direct bearing on your productivity and productivity of the people around you, which would lead to organizational productivity.
Since we're all about numbers, is there measurement on that front, or you just intuition?
See, I think it's intuitive, but what we are also saying is that, this test that we are talking about, right? It's a behavioral test. It's an assessment at a point of time. So imagine you've done it now and you got a score. Now suppose tomorrow in your action planning you say, hey, my mental is under-indexed. Let me start, and you can see what the score was. Say, suppose reading was an opportunity or learning a new skill, and you start that journey. 6 months later, you could do another quick assessment to check, has the needle moved? So in that sense, there are some metrics, but we are also thinking through in terms of saying what else can we do as we take it outside of the book to form a little bit more tangible metrics which will allow people to measure the shift in the needle.
I'm hoping that there are questions in the audience as well as online.
Yes.
All right, started coming, right? All right, maybe we can pepper that as well in, or would you like me to keep going? All right. Few more. I can keep going. Yes. All right, super. So one of the other things that I found as I was reading the book is almost this paradoxical set of polarities, right, that a leader has to actually deal with. One side you say self-orientation. Other side, we don't want leaders who are self-oriented. We want them to be thinking about other people, right? So that's an example of a polarity. Another time we say, listen, let's actually be compassionate. Well, that's not necessarily a great trait, right? If you want to get the job done. So how do we think about some of these polarities that is required, right, in leading a team of any sort? And how do you, right, think about nurturing in that context?
Yeah, in fact, we have mentioned that in the book because we know that is going to be a struggle. And it's never 0 or 100, right? You have somewhere on the spectrums. We look at 3 polarities, as you said, self and other orientation, the balance between discipline and flexibility, and ambition and compassion. And leadership is actually about solving seemingly opposing dilemmas, right? So we've actually given some best practices. For example, when you look at how do you balance between self and others, setting clear boundaries is one simple practice. Whereas a leader says, yes, I want to be approachable, but it doesn't mean anybody can come up to you at any point of time and, have a conversation. Set clear boundaries, make yourself available, but say, hey, maybe not this time or that time. So setting boundaries is one of them. The other practice we say is insist and innovate for discipline and flexibility. Certain things are non-negotiable. Like no matter what, I will do my exercise. But if that is not there, can I innovate? Can I find a practice whereby I will take this meeting walking and therefore meet my physical goal? So know when to insist, when to innovate. So there are, ways in which we can manage. And when you say ambition and compassion, you have to balance compassion for self as well and compassion for others. Can you be kind to yourself first? Yes, drive yourself really hard because you're ambitious, but also be kind to yourself and don't kill yourself. So these are some of the ways in which you can balance these polarities. Firstly, recognize that there is this pull, there is a polarity, and then, look at which practice will help you, basis your own nature, values, and personality. So what works for one may not. And context. We found there is one of the leaders we spoke to has an amazing Excel spreadsheet where he has put everything. This is what I'll do for physical, mental, emotional, and he tracks it every weekend. He gives himself, tick marks, red, blue, and green. And, we were really super impressed with that, but not everybody can do it. So you have to figure out what works for you and say, what is the best way in which I can navigate these two?
So in addition to work-life balance, which we're all familiar with, I think that there are 3 more dimensions of balance that you've laid out for us, right, in terms of managing that tightrope. So let's maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about the process of writing the book itself. Rajesh, what was the most challenging part of writing this book?
So I think while the broad thought was there, because we had a very strong calling towards the thought, but approaching it from very different perspectives. Me having worked for 30 years,